Hello! How is everybody doing? I hope you guys doing really well. Our talk is going to be about the cure for depression, but it's not only depression, it's also other negative emotions that can be cured by the practice I'm going to share with you this evening. For those who are with me for the first time, I am Monique Rebelle. I'm the author of this book, Transcendence Calling, The Power of Kundalini Rising and Spiritual Enlightenment. I wrote this book years after I had my spontaneous experience that I didn't know anything about when it was happening, but later I found out that that was Kundalini Rising. And since then, I have been, at first sporadically and then more and more, helping others, teaching what I found during my experience, and then later through contemplation and just the creation of the whole system that's actually something very new. And this is why I wrote the book, and this is why I am sharing quite often information about the results of my experience and my insights. I'm also going to publish soon, I don't know exactly the time, but there is another book coming I want to share with you. This is probably how it's going to look like. Maybe a little different, but the title is going to be 7 Steps to a Better Human, our multidimensional consciousness system, overview and basic practices. So, in a way, this book was just the first book that I wrote that shares my personal life and my experience. Today, we're going to talk about how I initially, on my own, intuitively, fought depression and suicidal state, and how, as a result of that practice, I was saved. That is, instead of taking my life, I actually had a full Kundalini rising experience. I hope that it's going to be helpful to you, whether you feel that you have depression, you're depressed sometimes, or even not at all. All of us, everyone has those negative emotions bothering us. If we don't do anything about it, it's not going to go away on its own. There are different ways of dealing with negative emotions, and what I myself was always for was to be able to deal with it yourself, to know who you are and how to be in a driver's seat of your life. So, to start with, I would like to share with you that this practice that we're going to talk about today has 2 objectives in mind. The first one is to know how to remove depression or other negative emotion. Although depression is a little bit more complex, it doesn't really matter. It's just about being able to remove yourself from it and maintain that state until that emotion is simply disintegrated. And the other purpose, more important actually, of that practice is to help our consciousness, our spirit, our individual unit of consciousness. That's what I call Kundalini. To help Kundalini to start moving up. Kundalini is our spirit and our consciousness, and that consciousness, although scientifically not yet proved, that consciousness is magical. Our powers are magical, but we are not always, most of the time, we aren't able to use them. And the reason for it is that our consciousness resides at the bottom of the spine, and it's not fully awakened. We do have more and more knowledge and factual experiences of awakenings, and all of those experiences have to do with either Kundalini rising to some degree or upper chakras opening. And that's a subject for another talk. What is most important for us right now is that by practicing the practice that I call Emotions-Emptiness, we will be able to bring our second chakra to neutral state. I call it emptiness, and that's because because of that practice, this chakra will release all the charge. The charge will be gone. And when we are depressed, we have that charge in our whole system, and it's residing here, and it could be affecting our physical being and definitely our mental state. So physical being is the first chakra, and I call chakras the gates to the dimensions, ever-present dimensions of perception. The basics of the system that I'm working with and that I teach, the system of our multidimensional consciousness, is that I was able to perceive during my experience, without knowing anything about chakras, that in life we are able to interact with different dimensions of perception, different worlds, different aspects of our life. And chakras are the gates to those dimensions. So if the emotional chakra, which is the second chakra, it has a lot of charge, we're stuck. We're stuck emotionally, and we're troubled. We can't get out of that state. And as much as different emotions like anger could be very temporary, anxiety as well, depression, once it sets, it kind of sits there, and then more events happen, and those events are the events of the third chakra and the third dimension of mind and will. This is where time, the subdimension of time, exists. And this is where we create the story. So in order to help Kundalini to move up and clear up all of the chakras, we need to practice. All of us need to practice. And the practices are different for every dimension. For the second one, which I call only emotional, and I consider, by the way, Kundalini itself, once it's in the body, our spirit gets those attributes of survival, sexuality, and creativity. And the second chakra, being very close to Kundalini, is often misunderstood as also sexual and creative. And it's true that Kundalini itself, being so close to the second chakra, gives it that kind of notion of being sexual and creative, but actually it's just emotional charge. So it could be positive or negative. However, whether it's negative or positive, it's still a charge. And in order to release that charge, it's no problem with positive emotions, but it's the negative ones that give us trouble. So in order to release that charge and have that chakra neutral, and Kundalini will rise by itself then. So these practices are, similar practices are known, have been known for hundreds of years or even millennia. But I'm presenting them from a little different viewpoint because of the whole multidimensional consciousness system, in which we learn that chakras are in our subtle body system as the gates to different dimensions. So each one operates differently, and each dimension is different, has a different vibration and different information, different data that we can get from it and also share with it. So each of the chakras on the lower ones can be congested. The first one is congested when we are sick. So we're stuck then also. Diseases make Kundalini stuck, feeling stuck in just here in between the first and second chakra. The second one, if we're overwhelmed emotionally, if we have consistent emotional triggers and build up, that chakra can be very congested. And of course, the mind. This is the mind. The brain that we have in the skull is the first dimension of perception. The second dimension is emotions, and the third one is the mind. In this chakra, we hold all our mental structures that we've learned since we started thinking in this lifetime, or maybe even from past lifetimes. All the thoughts and decisions are here, and we tend to hold on to them. We need to have a story. We need to have past. We need to think about, project into future. In our system, in our subtle body, these chakras, dominance of them, that's the ego. So we always need to react emotionally. We need to figure out what to do, and we need to know what's going on with our bodies. The upper chakras, we have sometimes open, sometimes closed, sometimes they are developed and sometimes not, and even the upper ones can be congested. So if we are dealing with, let's say, depression, this is what I was dealing with. And let me just tell you the short story, how it happened that I was able to bring myself to the state of no emotional charge, which is what we need. I know in psychology, we are often reminded that, oh, if we think about something good, the bad feelings will go away. And, to a degree, it's true, but it's not a permanent solution, and it's not going to help our consciousness to rise. Because any emotion creates charge. So for myself, when I had hatred and this violent desire to destroy myself, I started to practice this one exercise that I had been doing before for years. I'm a painter, and in order to stick to my promise to myself that I need to be painting as much as possible, as often as possible, and try to do it every day, I learned to move away from depression, from anger, rage, sadness, or any other feeling that was dragging me down and making me feel unable to do anything good anyway. I was able to move myself away from it and focus right on the painting. And sometimes I could even feel the energy, my energy, disappearing into the painting, going on the brush. But at that moment, when it was happening right before my experience took place, I didn't have painting in front of me, and I was too far gone into that state of wanting to end my life to think about painting. I couldn't do it anymore. But I was able to do one thing, and this is the first principle of the practice. You don't have to be really suicidal to do this. You can just have a sense of being depressed sometimes, and that's enough to try this exercise, try this practice, and see how quickly you can bring yourself in control of your life and remove yourself from negativity that's not necessarily outside, but it's kind of gotten into you because of whatever situations in your life brought it. And I have to say that I'm preparing an online course. Right now I'm just teaching one-on-one or in small groups on Zoom, but I'm preparing an online course. I haven't been preparing it for a while, and several times I did surveys to find out what is needed. And even though not many people admit to being depressed, actually from those surveys, I had 4 of them. So overall, it was probably, I think it was about 50 people that participated. Some of it was anonymous and some of it wasn't, but I found out that actually depression is very common, that more than half of participants in the survey were finding themselves in a depressive state and wanted to get out of it. We just don't talk about it much. It's not something that we necessarily want to share with others. It's something that we have special health practitioners to help us with, but that usually happens through pharmaceutical drugs and sometimes through psychology. If it's not a very psychotherapy, if it's not a very deep state of depression, it could be helped with psychotherapy. But I personally, that's not what I teach. I teach something from a very different viewpoint. I'm sharing information about spiritual enlightenment, about Kundalini rising, about the subtle body, and how to deal with our whole life ourselves. And we can do it. And if we manage to, we can arrive at having all of the chakras open and find out for sure that we're not only immortal, the soul is immortal, but we also have incredible qualities that, if practiced, if developed, if cultivated, will make us evolve into much better beings than we are at this moment, this time on this planet. So the first step of the practice that I call Emotions-Emptiness is to separate the story that gets you down from the emotion that you feel. It's very, very important to do that. Without it, we can't progress. And this is also the whole course that I'm teaching, the 8-module course, is taught from the viewpoint that we need to separate each of the dimensions and work on each one separately. So train individually each chakra. And this meeting today is about working on the second chakra. So we often, or most of the time, we have it all together. There is a story, something happened. My dog passed away, and there was another dog and a cat and maybe other animals, or maybe some other sad story that happened. All of that over time caused me to be depressed. There could be any story. There could be any story. The point is that whether it's an extremely difficult, convoluted story, or just a singular event that causes depression, it doesn't matter. The story doesn't matter. What matters is what you feel and what it does to you. So the first step is to separate the emotion itself, what do you feel and what it does to you, from the whole story, lengthy or short. Once you have that, it has to be one emotion. We often can say, oh, I feel depressed and sad and angry and I'm in fear and so on. But there is one emotion that's leading. There is this one emotion that's kind of putting it all together and relates to that story. So we have to focus on that one emotion And then once we have that one emotion, we need to call it, give it a name. I myself gave that emotion the name depression. And you can give it any name that you feel fits in your view, because it doesn't have to be a scientifically proper name. It's just something that makes you understand what is bothering you. Once you have that name, it suddenly becomes limited. And you can look through it because it is limited. It's not endless. The next step was for me to realize that I have that emotion that's basically killing me. And now I know what it is, and I realize that's actually, it's not endless, but it's just like on top of me. It's like this dark cloud. That emotion was not in other people that I knew. It was not somewhere on the other end of the street. It was not somewhere else. It was just around me. So I saw it as this dark cloud that prohibited me to be happy, that was paralyzing me, that was making me unable to move, that was making me stay in bed, try to sleep the whole day after day after day, not going anywhere, not wanting to do anything. And then later, it finally made me want to end my life. And this is the same as what I find from my students. It's the same thing. Whatever you call it and it works, it will kind of click at that moment. It clicks and you know, this is it. This is it. That's the emotion. Let's say it's depression. It makes you feel bad, right? And it affects so much in your life. It affects your decisions. It affects your well-being. It affects your health. It affects your relationships. It's just so much destruction that it brings. And then I realized that if I can look at it and see all the way what it does to me and the power that it has over me, I also realized that I am not it. And that's a very important thing. This is very, very important thing. You need to realize that you are not that emotion. And this is a very, very deep, important truth about our lives. We are not our minds, just like Buddha was saying, just like Eckhart Tolle is saying, we are not our mind. We are also not our emotions. We are actually able to remove ourselves from the influence of the emotion. And it is not through psychology and explanations and excuses and going into past and figuring out who said what and who did what and what it made us feel. It is just a decision. Engage your mind in making a decision to actually move away from that cloud. And I'm saying move away from it, even though it may seem like, well, how am I going to move away from it? Maybe push it away. We don't push it away. We don't attack it. That's gonna make that energy stick with us more because we are giving it fuel. We need to remove ourselves from it. Almost as if it wasn't yours, right? Just like put it to the side. And with strong emotions that are created after difficult circumstances that made us upset, and if we have tendency to be really emotional and have strong emotions like I do, and I know many others, the qualities of an empath, of course, we are soaking up others' negative emotions. So whatever it is, we are able to move away from it, not by pushing it away, but by removing ourselves. And that's the whole trick, basically, of being able to engage your mind. And that's another practice combined with it. That's the practice on the mind and will and the third chakra. But we're going to be always using the mind to make decisions. So we're making a decision of actually stepping out of that emotion. What I always suggest, and that's what I did, is to step out to the side, not step out to the back, not step out to the front to have it in the back, not step out to the back to have it right in front, but move it to the side. With strong emotions, it's not so, it seems like it's not easy. So we're not kind of completely cutting it out because it's there, right? It's there. We're feeling it. We're feeling the heaviness of it. So it's not that we are negating its existence. We have to accept that it exists, but we moved away from it. It may be just standing, just that cloud, that dark cloud may be just next to us, but we're not feeding it. We're ignoring it. We just don't pay any attention to it. But the way to be able to not to have that emotion come back with the whole story and everything, because that's what always happens anyway, so we have to repeat the whole process. But in order to at least get to that, to find ourselves in that state of emotional emptiness, we need to use our mind, the mind that would tell to, because our mind it's also something that is supposed to work for us, not against us. So all the stories that our mind is telling us that are putting us down, we don't have to accept them as ourselves. The spirit is magical, free, extremely, superbly intelligent, and able. So we don't have to allow ourselves to be overwhelmed and oppressed by emotion or oppressed by the story. And for that purpose, not to be used by the mind, we need to order our mind to protect us like a gate from that negative emotion that we just moved away from. Protect us from it to come back. And this is a practice that at first seems like, oh my God, how am I gonna do that? It's coming back. The emotion is coming back. The mind is not listening to us. It brings the story back. But in my experience, for the first time when I was doing it, and always afterwards, and as much as my students were also able to tell me, although everyone is different, so everyone learns it, some very fast, for some it's really difficult to even separate the mind from the emotion, the story from the emotion. But all that needs to be done, all those steps need to be done. And telling the mind to guard from emotion, it's a very kind of, it's a state that's reminiscent of a meditative state, but we are using our mind. We're focusing the mind. The mind is focused on being the no to the emotion. So the mind is protecting us from that emotion. And as long as the mind is focused, magic happens. The first thing that happens is that we find ourselves in the state of emptiness. And this is a very, very particular state. At first, if you practice this exercise, you might find it for just a second, and then the mind goes in and the story starts again and you start feeling bad again. But if you keep on going back to the beginning or to the moment where either you realize that you are not your emotion, or maybe you have to find a better name for that emotion because it wasn't really working, or maybe again separating the mind, the story from the emotion, or maybe it's just the last moment of the mind not being faithful to you and cheating on you and going into the story again and bringing it all back. It's a very straightforward action. Say no to the emotion. The mind is saying no. And in the meantime, we are experiencing that incredible state that spiritual masters talked about. Ramana Maharshi talked about it. Buddha talked about it. And other spiritual teachers talked about emptiness. Buddhists. There is a big deal about emptiness, and because Buddhism does not see the dimensions of perception in the way that I was able to observe and experience during my Kundalini rising, and that emptiness, that concept of emptiness is not specific. In my teachings, it's very specific. It just deals with the second chakra. So once we are finding ourselves in that state of emptiness, we should dwell in it as long as we can. And at first it may be a few seconds, but later it can be much longer. And that state, not feeling something good, because that's another emotion. State without emotions, it's like a desolate landscape that it doesn't feel good and doesn't feel bad either. This is the thing about that emptiness. It's not a most comfortable state because we are always looking for emotional satisfaction, and we are always experiencing little negative emotions here and there, maybe just for a second, maybe just from somebody else if we are very positive all the time. Just saying, each of us is different. But that particular state of emptiness is what needs to be experienced, and staying in that state and focusing on breathing. And that probably reminds you of other spiritual practices, different meditations, focusing on breathing and still having the mind protecting us from that emotion, and focusing on breathing and experiencing that state of emotional emptiness. is what will allow you to have that emotion, that negative emotion, that depression, disintegrate little by little, because you don't feed it, but you bring prana. By focusing on breathing, you bring prana, the magical power of breath, the air, into our system, and clear up the second chakra and allow Kundalini to move up. And when it's moving up, it will make your mind clear too. So you'll start without that negative emotion, without that depression that makes you feel unable, lost, useless. Without that sense of heavy emotion, your mind is going to make better decisions, suddenly come up with decisions, suddenly become creative, because Kundalini will be rising up. And once Kundalini is rising up, it clears up the emotional chakra and it brings creativity to our thinking. So there are 7 steps. I maybe didn't mention each step, but I have that practice on my website under teachings. I think it is teachings or services on my website, www.moniquerebelle.com. And also, of course, this is a part of the second module in this 8-module course that I'm teaching, that's called Higher Self, a course in our multidimensional consciousness system. So if you're interested in the whole program where we work on each chakra as the gate to all these different dimensions of perception, and we explore the dimensions and we learn how to train the lower chakras and how to cultivate the upper ones, and there is much, much more to it, go to my website and find out more about it, or sign up for an orientation session and we can discuss the details of the program. Please let me know if you have any questions, comments. I'm very happy to discuss all of that. Best is probably Zoom meeting, so you're welcome to schedule one with me. And good luck. I hope you get great results practicing this emotion emptiness practice. Let me know how it goes. And if you want to find a PDF of it, is, as I said, on my website, moniquerebelle.com, under services. There is a link to it. And so you can have all the steps written out in proper order. Okay, thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, and I hope to see you again.